14-year-old Philip Chisum followed his math teacher, Colleen Ritzer, into a second-floor bathroom at Danvers High School on October 22, 2013. The 24-year-old teacher, beloved by her students and known for her infectious enthusiasm for mathematics, had stayed after school to help students with extra tutoring. She had no reason to suspect that the quiet freshman who had just joined her class a few months earlier was about to commit one of the most brutal crimes in Massachusetts history. At approximately 3 p.m., Philip entered the women's bathroom wearing gloves, a box cutter hidden in his pocket. What happened in that bathroom over the next hour was so horrific that even veteran homicide detectives struggled to process the scene. Colleen was strangled, stabbed 16 times in the neck and chest, sexually assaulted, and left for dead. Philip then placed her body in a recycling bin, wheeled it outside into the woods behind the school, and dumped her in a shallow ravine. He robbed her of her credit cards, her identification, and her dignity. When police found Colleen's body the following morning, partially covered with leaves and branches, the investigation into her murder would lead to a trial that captivated the nation and raised profound questions about evil, mental illness, and whether a teenager who commits such monstrous acts can ever be redeemed. If you're watching this video, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Philip Chisum was born on January 21, 1999, in Clarksville, Tennessee, a small city about 40 miles northwest of Nashville. He was the eldest of 3 children born to Judith and Stacy Chisum. By all accounts, Philip's early childhood was unremarkable. He attended local schools, played youth soccer, and was described by elementary school teachers as polite, quiet, and academically capable. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal childhood, there were warning signs that something was not quite right. Philip's parents had a tumultuous marriage, marked by frequent arguments and periods of separation. Court records show that Stacy Chisum had a history of domestic violence, with police being called to the family home multiple times throughout Philip's childhood. In 2009, when Philip was 10 years old, his mother Judith finally filed for divorce, citing domestic abuse and expressing fear for her safety and that of her children. The divorce was contentious and bitter, with custody battles that dragged on for months. Following the divorce, Judith moved with Philip and his 2 younger siblings to Danvers, Massachusetts, seeking a fresh start far away from Tennessee and the painful memories associated with it. Danvers is a small town about 20 miles north of Boston, known for its colonial history and its reputation as a safe, family-friendly community. Judith found work as a customer service representative and enrolled Philip at Danvers High School for the 2013-2014 academic year. The move to Massachusetts was difficult for Philip. He had left behind all of his friends, his extended family, and the only home he had ever known. At Danvers High School, he was the new kid with a southern accent in a town where most students had known each other since elementary school. He struggled to make friends and spent most of his time alone, eating lunch by himself, walking the hallways with his head down, rarely speaking unless spoken to. Teachers noted that Philip seemed withdrawn and sad, but he wasn't disruptive or failing academically, so he didn't trigger any red flags that might have led to intervention. Philip's one connection to the school community was through soccer. He had been a decent player in Tennessee, and he tried out for the Danvers High School soccer team in September 2013. He made the team and seemed to find some sense of belonging on the field. Teammates would later describe Philip as quiet but focused during practice, someone who followed instructions and worked hard, but never really opened up or socialized with the group outside of scheduled activities. The soccer coach, Michael Chase, told investigators after the murder that Philip had seemed normal and that there had been no incidents or concerns during the brief time he was on the team. But in Philip's mind, something was fracturing. He missed his father desperately, despite the abuse that had driven his family from Tennessee. He resented his mother for moving them so far away. He struggled with the isolation and loneliness of being the outsider in a new place, and he was experiencing mental health symptoms that no one recognized or addressed: auditory hallucinations, paranoid thoughts, feelings of depersonalization. Philip would later tell forensic psychologists that, in the weeks leading up to the murder, he began hearing voices telling him to hurt people. that he felt like he was watching himself from outside his own body, that he couldn't control his thoughts or actions. On October 22, 2013, something triggered a catastrophic break in Philip's already fragile mental state. The exact trigger remains disputed. Philip would later claim that Ms. Ritzer had said something about Tennessee during class that upset him, though other students present that day couldn't recall any such comment. What is clear is that during 7th period math class, Philip's last class of the day, he made a decision. He was going to kill his teacher. Colleen Ritzer was everything a teacher should be: passionate, dedicated, endlessly patient, and genuinely invested in her students' success. At just 24 years old, she was in only her second year of teaching, having graduated from Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts, with a degree in mathematics and a minor in psychology. Teaching had been Colleen's dream since high school, and she approached it with an enthusiasm and creativity that made even the most challenging mathematical concepts accessible and engaging for her students. Colleen grew up in Andover, Massachusetts, the second of 3 daughters in a close-knit family. Her parents, Thomas and Peggy Ritzer, described her as compassionate, driven, and always willing to help others. From a young age, Colleen had exhibited a natural gift for mathematics and a desire to share that gift with others. In high school, she tutored younger students, volunteered at community centers, and participated in every extracurricular activity related to math and science she could find. At Assumption College, Colleen excelled academically, while also being deeply involved in campus life. She was a member of several honor societies, participated in service trips during her breaks, and was known among her peers as someone who would drop everything to help a friend in need. Her college roommate, Sarah Martinez, would later tell reporters that Colleen had a light about her that made everyone around her feel valued and seen. After graduating in 2011, Colleen immediately began pursuing her teaching career. She completed her student teaching requirements at a middle school in Worcester, where her supervising teacher noted in her evaluation that Colleen had exceptional rapport with students and a natural teaching instinct that is rare in someone so young. In fall 2012, Colleen was hired by Danvers High School to teach mathematics, and she threw herself into the role with characteristic passion. Colleen was the kind of teacher who stayed after school every day to offer extra help to struggling students. She created engaging lesson plans that incorporated technology and real-world applications to make math relevant and interesting. She decorated her classroom with inspirational posters and student work. She attended her students' sports games and school plays. She responded to emails at all hours, always willing to answer one more question or explain one more concept. Her students loved her, and her fellow teachers admired her dedication. On social media, Colleen frequently posted about her love for teaching. "I have the best job in the world," she wrote on Twitter just days before her death. She shared photos of her classroom, celebrated her students' successes, and posted motivational quotes about education and personal growth. Her last tweet, posted the morning of October 22nd, was a link to an article about innovative teaching methods with the comment, "Always looking for new ways to engage my students." That afternoon, as she did most days, Colleen stayed after school to help students who needed extra assistance with their homework or upcoming tests. Several students came by her classroom between 2:30 and 3 p.m. Philip Chisum was among them. According to other students who were present, Philip asked Ms. Ritzer a question about a math problem. She helped him work through it, and then he left the classroom. Nothing about the interaction seemed unusual or concerning. What those students didn't know was that Philip had already made his decision. He had the box cutter in his pocket. He had brought gloves from home. He had been planning this throughout the school day, possibly for days or weeks before. And when Ms. Ritzer left her classroom around 3 p.m. to use the bathroom before preparing to go home, Philip followed her. The second-floor women's bathroom at Danvers High School was located at the end of a hallway, away from most classrooms and administrative offices. At 3 p.m., with most students having left for the day, and those remaining scattered throughout the building in various after-school activities, it was a relatively isolated location.
Philip waited outside the bathroom until Ms. Ritzer entered, and then he followed her inside. What happened in that bathroom was reconstructed by investigators through forensic evidence.
Philip's eventual confession and surveillance footage from cameras in the hallway. Philip put on the gloves he had brought. He pulled out the box cutter. When Ms. Ritzer realized he was there and asked him what he was doing, he attacked. He punched her in the face, knocking her to the ground. She tried to fight back, tried to scream, but Philip was bigger and stronger and had the element of surprise. He strangled her until she lost consciousness, then used the box cutter to stab her repeatedly in the neck and chest. 16 separate wounds that punctured her throat, her lungs, her heart. But the violence didn't end there. After Ms. Ritzer was dead or dying, Philip sexually assaulted her body. He then rummaged through her belongings, taking her credit cards, her driver's license, and her iPhone. He spent approximately 30 minutes in that bathroom with his teacher's body, during which time he attempted to clean up some of the blood and moved her body to a different location within the bathroom. The medical examiner would later determine that Ms. Ritzer died from asphyxia and stab wounds of neck and torso. She had been both strangled and stabbed to death, and some of the wounds had been inflicted while she was still alive. Surveillance cameras in the hallway outside the bathroom captured Philip entering at approximately 3:01 p.m. The cameras show him wearing the gloves as he enters. At 3:30 p.m., the cameras capture Philip leaving the bathroom, no longer wearing gloves, carrying a recycling barrel on wheels, the kind used throughout the school to collect paper and plastic for recycling. The barrel appeared heavy and difficult to maneuver, and Philip struggled briefly before getting it out of frame. He was also seen carrying Ms. Ritzer's belongings, her purse, her phone, items that clearly did not belong to him. Philip wheeled the recycling barrel containing Ms. Ritzer's body out through a back door of the school and into a wooded area behind the athletic fields. Surveillance cameras captured him exiting the building at 3:44 p.m. He pushed the barrel approximately 100 feet into the woods before dumping Ms. Ritzer's body in a shallow ravine and covering it with leaves, branches, and debris. He then discarded the recycling barrel in the woods and walked away. At approximately 4:15 p.m., Philip was seen on surveillance cameras at a local movie theater about a mile from the school. He had changed his clothes. He was now wearing different pants and a different jacket, having disposed of the blood-covered clothing he had been wearing. He used one of Ms. Ritzer's stolen credit cards to purchase a ticket to see the movie Blue Jasmine, and he spent the next 2 hours sitting in the theater, watching the film as if nothing had happened. When the movie ended, he walked to a nearby Wendy's restaurant, used Ms. Ritzer's credit card again to purchase food, and ate dinner. He was calm, showed no signs of distress, behaved like any normal teenager on an evening out. Meanwhile, back at Danvers High School, concerns were growing about Ms. Ritzer's whereabouts. She had not checked out at the main office, which was unusual for her as she was meticulous about following school protocols. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her classroom was locked, but some of her personal belongings, including her coat and keys, were missing. By 6:30 p.m., when Ms. Ritzer had still not returned any phone calls or text messages from worried family members and colleagues, her mother Peggy called the Danvers Police Department to report her daughter missing. Police responded to the school and began a preliminary investigation. They spoke with staff members who had seen Ms. Ritzer that afternoon, reviewed her schedule, and began checking surveillance footage to determine when she had last been seen on campus. The footage quickly revealed something disturbing. Ms. Ritzer entering the second-floor bathroom at 3:01 p.m. and then Philip Chisum entering the same bathroom moments later wearing gloves. Then, nearly half an hour later, Philip exiting with the recycling barrel. Police immediately knew something was very wrong. Officers went to the Chisum residence to speak with Philip, arriving at approximately 8 p.m. Philip's mother Judith answered the door and told police that Philip was not home. He had left the house around 6:30 p.m. and she didn't know where he had gone. She seemed genuinely surprised and concerned when police informed her they needed to speak with Philip regarding a missing teacher. She tried calling Philip's cell phone, but he didn't answer. Police issued a be on the lookout alert for Philip, describing him as a person of interest in Ms. Ritzer's disappearance. At approximately 12:30 a.m. on October 23rd, a Topsfield police officer spotted a teenage male walking along Route 1, several miles north of Danvers. The officer stopped to check on the individual and quickly recognized him as Philip Chisum from the Bolo alert. Philip was taken into custody without incident and transported to the Danvers police station. At the police station, Philip was read his Miranda rights. Initially, he invoked his right to remain silent and requested an attorney. But before his attorney arrived, Philip made several statements to Detective John Doyle that would prove crucial to the investigation. He admitted he had been the last person to see Ms. Ritzer alive. He described following her into the bathroom. He said he did something bad, and that police would find Ms. Ritzer's body in the woods behind the school. He directed police to the location where he had dumped her body. When asked why he had killed his teacher, Philip's response was chilling. "The teacher was talking to me about Tennessee, and I became upset. I became the teacher." At approximately 3 a.m. on October 23rd, police discovered Ms. Ritzer's body in the woods behind Danvers High School, exactly where Philip had indicated it would be. The scene was horrific. Her body was partially concealed by leaves and branches, lying in a ravine. She was partially undressed, and there was significant blood in the surrounding area. The medical examiner arrived on scene at dawn and began the careful process of documenting and recovering Ms. Ritzer's body. The preliminary examination confirmed what police already suspected. She had been the victim of extreme violence, with multiple stab wounds and signs of strangulation. Philip Chisum was formally arrested and charged with murder, aggravated rape, and armed robbery on October 23, 2013. Due to the severity of the charges and the fact that Philip was 14 years old, the case immediately raised questions about whether he should be tried as an adult or remain in the juvenile justice system. Massachusetts law allowed for juveniles aged 14 and older to be tried as adults for murder charges, and given the brutal nature of the crime, prosecutors moved quickly to pursue adult charges. The arrest sent shockwaves through the Danvers community. Vigils were held for Ms. Ritzer, with hundreds of students, teachers, and community members gathering to mourn the loss of a beloved teacher whose life had been cut tragically short. The Danvers High School auditorium became a makeshift memorial, with flowers, candles, photos, and handwritten notes covering every available surface. Students and teachers struggled to comprehend how one of their own had committed such an unspeakable act. The Ritzer family released a statement, expressing their profound grief and thanking the community for their support. "Colleen was our daughter, our sister, our friend, and an amazing teacher who touched countless lives," the statement read. "We are devastated by her loss and struggling to understand how something so terrible could happen to someone so good. We ask for privacy as we mourn and try to make sense of this tragedy." The investigation continued in the days and weeks following Philip's arrest. Digital forensics experts analyzed Philip's phone, computer, and internet search history. What they found was disturbing. Searches for how to dispose of a body, how to clean up blood, how to avoid detection by police. These searches had been conducted in the days leading up to the murder, providing clear evidence of premeditation. There was also evidence that Philip had brought the gloves and box cutter from home specifically for this purpose. They were not items he would have had at school for any legitimate reason. Investigators also discovered that on the evening of the murder, after watching the movie and eating dinner, Philip had attempted to use Ms. Ritzer's credit card at several other locations. He went to a convenience store and tried to purchase additional items, but the card was declined, likely because by that point, Ms. Ritzer's mother had reported her missing and the bank had been notified to freeze her accounts. This attempt to continue using the stolen credit card hours after the murder demonstrated a complete lack of remorse or understanding of the gravity of what he had done. The medical examiner's full autopsy report was completed in early November 2013. It confirmed that Ms. Ritzer had been strangled and stabbed 16 times, with wounds to her neck and torso. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxia and stab wounds.
The report also confirmed that Ms. Ritzer had been sexually assaulted after death, a detail that was particularly devastating to her family, and that would result in the aggravated rape charges against Philip. The medical examiner noted that the level of violence inflicted was extraordinary and suggested extreme rage or a complete lack of empathy. Philip's defense team, led by public defender Denise Regan, immediately began preparing for what they knew would be an uphill battle.
The evidence against Philip was overwhelming. His own confession, surveillance footage, DNA evidence, stolen property in his possession, digital evidence of premeditation. The only viable defense strategy was to argue that Philip was mentally ill at the time of the murder, and therefore could not be held fully responsible for his actions. Defense attorneys hired forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard Dudley to evaluate Philip. Dr. Dudley spent hours interviewing Philip, reviewing his medical and educational records, and conducting psychological testing. His evaluation, completed in January 2014, concluded that Philip suffered from severe mental illness, specifically a psychotic disorder with features of schizophrenia. Dr. Dudley's report stated that Philip had been experiencing auditory hallucinations for months before the murder, hearing voices that told him to hurt people. He described Philip as being in the midst of a psychotic episode during the murder, unable to distinguish right from wrong, and essentially not in control of his own actions. The prosecution hired their own forensic psychiatrists to evaluate Philip, and their conclusions were starkly different. Dr. Nancy Hebben and Dr. Frank DiCataldo both evaluated Philip and concluded that while he may have had some mental health issues, he was not psychotic and was fully aware of what he was doing when he killed Ms. Ritzer. They pointed to the extensive planning, the attempts to cover up the crime, the use of Ms. Ritzer's credit cards after the murder, and his ability to behave normally in public after committing the crime, as evidence that he understood his actions and their consequences. The trial of Philip Chisum began in November 2015, nearly 2 years after the murder. The trial was held in Essex County Superior Court in Salem, Massachusetts, before Judge David Lowy. Philip, now 16 years old, sat at the defense table wearing a suit and tie, looking like the quiet teenager he appeared to be, rather than the brutal killer he had proven himself capable of becoming. The courtroom was packed every day of the trial, with Ms. Ritzer's family seated in the front row on one side, Philip's mother and family on the other side, separated by a gulf of grief, anger, and incomprehension. Prosecutor Kate McDougall delivered an opening statement that methodically laid out the evidence against Philip. She described the planning that went into the murder, the brutality of the attack, the sexual assault, the theft, the attempts to cover up the crime. She showed the jury surveillance footage of Philip following Ms. Ritzer into the bathroom wearing gloves, then emerging with the recycling barrel containing her body. She described how Philip had spent the hours after the murder watching a movie and eating fast food, showing no signs of remorse or distress. This was not the act of someone in the grips of a psychotic break, McDougall told the jury. This was the calculated, premeditated murder of an innocent woman by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Defense attorney Denise Regan countered with an opening statement focused entirely on Philip's mental illness. She described a troubled teenager who had been hearing voices for months, who had begged his mother for help but had been dismissed, who was in the midst of a complete psychological breakdown when he killed Ms. Ritzer. Philip Chisum is not a monster, Regan told the jury. He is a sick child who desperately needed help and didn't get it. What happened to Ms. Ritzer is a tragedy, but what happened to Philip is also a tragedy. The tragedy of mental illness going unrecognized and untreated until it was too late. The trial lasted 3 weeks and featured testimony from dozens of witnesses, including police officers, forensic experts, teachers and students from Danvers High School, Philip's family members, and most importantly, the dueling psychiatric experts. The prosecution presented overwhelming physical evidence, DNA linking Philip to the crime scene, surveillance footage, Ms. Ritzer's belongings found in Philip's possession, his own confession. The defense didn't dispute any of these facts. Instead, they focused entirely on the question of Philip's mental state. Dr. Richard Dudley, the defense's psychiatric expert, testified that Philip had been experiencing command hallucinations, voices telling him to hurt people, for months before the murder. He described Philip as being in a dissociative state during the killing, essentially not present in his own body, acting on the commands of the voices without conscious awareness or control. Dr. Dudley acknowledged that Philip had attempted to cover up the crime, but argued that this was done in a confused, almost automatic way, rather than with clear criminal intent. The prosecution's psychiatric experts systematically dismantled this defense. Dr. Nancy Hebben testified that she found no evidence of psychosis in her evaluation of Philip. She pointed out that Philip's behavior before, during, and after the murder was inconsistent with someone experiencing a psychotic break. He had gone to school that morning and behaved normally all day. He had waited for the right opportunity to attack Ms. Ritzer when no one else was around. He had brought gloves and a weapon from home. He had attempted to clean up the crime scene. He had disposed of the body in a location where it might not be found. He had changed his clothes and destroyed evidence. He had used Ms. Ritzer's credit cards multiple times. All of these actions required planning, awareness, and understanding of right and wrong. Dr. Frank DiCataldo testified that he believed Philip's claims of hearing voices were fabricated or exaggerated to provide a basis for an insanity defense. He noted that Philip had never mentioned hearing voices to anyone before the murder, had never sought help for such symptoms, and had only begun describing these experiences after being arrested when it became clear he needed a defense strategy. DiCataldo testified that Philip showed clear signs of conduct disorder and antisocial traits, but not psychosis. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from students and teachers who had interacted with Philip on the day of the murder. Multiple witnesses testified that Philip had seemed completely normal in class that day. He participated in lessons, completed his work, interacted with other students. There was no indication of someone in the midst of a psychotic episode. Even in the hours after the murder, Philip had functioned normally in public, purchasing movie tickets and food, watching a film, walking around town. This behavior was inconsistent with acute psychosis. The prosecution also presented Philip's journal entries and text messages from the weeks before the murder. While some entries described feeling sad or isolated, none mentioned hearing voices or experiencing hallucinations. This contradicted the defense's claim that Philip had been suffering from severe psychotic symptoms for an extended period. On December 15, 2015, after deliberating for 2 full days, the jury returned their verdict. Philip Chisum was found guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of aggravated rape, and guilty of armed robbery. The jury had rejected the insanity defense, determining that Philip understood the nature and quality of his actions and knew that what he was doing was wrong. The guilty verdict meant that Philip would face a mandatory sentence of life in prison, though as a juvenile, he would be eligible for parole review after 25 years under Massachusetts law. The verdict brought relief to the Ritzer family, though Peggy Ritzer made clear in a statement that no verdict could bring her daughter back or ease the pain of their loss. "Justice has been served, but Colleen is still gone," she said. "We will never get to see her get married, have children, grow old. That was stolen from us, and no amount of prison time can give us back what we've lost." The sentencing hearing took place on February 26, 2016. Under Massachusetts law, Philip faced a mandatory life sentence for the first-degree murder conviction. However, he also faced separate sentences for the rape and robbery charges. Judge David Lowy had discretion in determining whether these sentences would run concurrently, at the same time, or consecutively, one after the other, and what the minimum time before parole eligibility would be. Before announcing the sentence, Judge Lowy allowed victim impact statements from the Ritzer family. Peggy Ritzer spoke first, her voice shaking with emotion, but her words clear and powerful. "Colleen was our light," she said. "She brought joy to everyone she met. She dedicated her life to helping children, to making the world better. And she was taken from us by one of those children she was trying to help. The pain we feel is indescribable. We wake up every day and have to remember all over again that she's gone. Philip Chisum stole her from us,
and he stole her future from the world. He deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did. Ms. Ritzer's father, Thomas Ritzer, spoke next. He described his daughter as his best friend and said that her death had fundamentally changed him. "I will never be whole again," he said. "A part of me died with Colleen. Philip Chisum is evil. There's no other word for it. What he did to my daughter, the violence, the violation, it haunts me every single day. He planned it, he executed it, and he showed no remorse. He deserves no mercy." Judge Lowy then addressed Philip directly before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Chisum, you have committed heinous crimes that have devastated a family and a community. Your defense has argued that you were mentally ill, but the jury did not believe that defense, and neither do I. The evidence shows clear planning,
Clear awareness of what you were doing, and clear efforts to cover up your crimes. You waited for the right opportunity. You brought gloves and a weapon from home. You attacked Ms. Ritzer when she was vulnerable and alone. You killed her. You violated her. You stole from her. And then you went about your evening as if nothing had happened. This was not the act of someone who didn't know what he was doing. This was evil." Judge Lowy continued, "Ms. Ritzer was a dedicated teacher who stayed after school to help students like you. She was kind, patient, and caring. She did not deserve what you did to her. No one deserves that. You took a bright light from this world, and you will pay for that for the rest of your life." Judge Lowy then pronounced sentence. On the charge of murder in the first degree, you are sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 25 years. On the charge of aggravated rape, you are sentenced to an additional term of 40 years in prison. On the charge of armed robbery, you are sentenced to an additional term of 40 years in prison. These sentences for rape and robbery will run concurrently with each other, but consecutively to the murder sentence. This means you will serve a minimum of 65 years in prison before you are eligible for parole consideration. At that time, you will be 79 years old. The sentence was one of the harshest ever imposed on a juvenile offender in Massachusetts. Philip showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs and transported to the Massachusetts Department of Correction to begin serving his sentence. The case sparked national debate about how to handle juvenile offenders who commit adult crimes. Child advocates argued that the sentence was too harsh, that even a teenager who commits terrible crimes deserves a chance at rehabilitation and eventual release. They pointed to brain science showing that teenage brains are not fully developed, particularly in areas governing impulse control and long-term decision-making. They argued that sentencing a 14-year-old to effectively die in prison violated principles of juvenile justice that emphasize rehabilitation over punishment. Others argued that the sentence was appropriate given the severity and brutality of the crime. They pointed out that Philip had not committed a crime of passion or impulse. He had planned the murder, executed it with extreme violence, and shown no remorse. They argued that some crimes are so heinous that even youth cannot be used as a shield against serious consequences. In the years since his sentencing, Philip Chisum has been incarcerated at a facility for youthful offenders in Massachusetts. He will be transferred to an adult prison when he turns 21. He has declined most interview requests and has maintained a low profile within the prison system. Reports from corrections officers describe him as quiet, compliant, and largely isolated from other inmates. He participates in limited educational and vocational programs available to him. In 2025, Philip's attorneys appealed his conviction and sentence to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that the trial judge had improperly excluded certain evidence about Philip's mental state and that the sentence was unconstitutionally harsh for a juvenile. The court rejected the appeal, ruling that the trial had been conducted fairly and that the sentence, while severe, was appropriate given the nature of the crimes. The court noted that Philip would have the opportunity to seek parole after 40 years, and that at that time his mental health, his behavior in prison, and his potential for rehabilitation could all be considered. The Ritzer family has continued to honor Colleen's memory through the Colleen Ritzer Memorial Scholarship Fund, which provides financial assistance to college students pursuing careers in education. The family has also become advocates for improved school safety protocols and better mental health screening for students. "We can't bring Colleen back," Peggy Ritzer has said, "but we can work to make sure other teachers are protected and other families don't have to experience what we've experienced." Danvers High School underwent significant changes in the aftermath of the murder. Security cameras were upgraded, protocols for staff working alone after hours were revised, and mental health resources for students were expanded. The school also established a permanent memorial to Ms. Ritzer, a bench in the school courtyard with a plaque that reads, "Colleen E. Ritzer, a teacher who inspired, a life that mattered, a light that will never go out." For the students who were in Ms. Ritzer's class that year, the trauma of losing their teacher in such a violent way has had lasting effects. Many have spoken about struggling with anxiety, depression, and trust issues in the years since. Some have pursued careers in education as a way to honor Ms. Ritzer's memory. Others have become advocates for school safety and mental health awareness. The case of Philip Chisum raises profound and uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the capacity for violence that can exist even in children, and how society should respond when young people commit monstrous acts. Philip was 14 years old when he murdered Ms. Ritzer, legally still a child but capable of extraordinary violence and cruelty. The psychiatric evaluations produced contradictory conclusions about his mental state, with some experts seeing a seriously mentally ill teenager in desperate need of treatment, and others seeing a calculating young killer who knew exactly what he was doing. What is clear is that multiple systems failed in this case. If Philip was indeed experiencing the mental health symptoms he and his defense team claimed, those symptoms should have been recognized and addressed long before they escalated to murder. His mother should have taken his complaints more seriously. His school should have had better screening processes to identify students in distress. The mental health system should have been more accessible and more proactive in reaching struggling youth. But even if Philip was mentally ill, the question remains, does that excuse or even mitigate what he did? He planned the murder. He brought gloves and a weapon from home. He chose the time and place carefully. He attacked his victim with extreme violence. He attempted to cover up the crime. He showed no remorse afterward. These are not the actions of someone who was completely divorced from reality or unable to understand right from wrong. They are the actions of someone who decided to kill and followed through on that decision with chilling effectiveness. The sentence Judge Lowy imposed, life with a minimum of 40 years before parole eligibility, reflects society's struggle with this question. Philip will be nearly 60 years old before he can even ask for parole, and there is no guarantee it will be granted. He will likely spend the majority of his life in prison. Whether this represents justice, revenge, or simply an acknowledgement that some acts are so terrible that they must carry severe consequences regardless of the perpetrator's age, remains a matter of debate. What is not debatable is the loss suffered by the Ritzer family and the Danvers community. Colleen Ritzer was a remarkable young woman whose life was dedicated to helping others. She had so much more to give to the world, so many more students to teach, so many more lives to touch, so many more moments of joy and accomplishment to experience. All of that was stolen from her in a school bathroom by a student she had tried to help. The profound unfairness of that loss is something her family carries every single day. As Philip Chisum sits in his prison cell, he has decades ahead of him to contemplate what he did and why. Whether he uses that time for genuine reflection and rehabilitation, or whether he remains the emotionally disconnected young man he appeared to be during his trial, only time will tell. But regardless of what happens to Philip, Colleen Ritzer is gone. Her students will never have another class with her. Her family will never share another holiday with her. Her future students will never benefit from her teaching. That is the permanent, irreversible consequence of the choice Philip made on October 22, 2013. The case serves as a stark reminder that evil can wear a young face, that violence can erupt from unexpected sources, and that the people we trust to keep us safe, our teachers, our schools, our systems, are sometimes powerless to prevent tragedy. It challenges us to ask difficult questions about mental health, juvenile justice, and how we identify and intervene with troubled youth before they become violent offenders. And it leaves us with the uncomfortable reality that sometimes there are no good answers, no clear solutions, only grief and loss, and the desperate hope that somehow, someday, we can prevent the next Colleen Ritzer from dying at the hands of the next Philip Chisum.